My name is Lillian, and my partner for this project was Mario. And we have a policy proposal called the Sources, Storage, and Stability Act that has to do with addressing food insecurity, particularly within the context of the climate crisis.
So I think we're at a point in our lives where we no longer have to imagine what a disaster or what a natural disaster looks like striking nearby or in our own lives. So if you can visualize that for a moment, you're familiar with then your Wawa, your Albertsons, your Kroger's, whatever your supermarket may be or your market may be near you, those shelves going bare and you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. That's the harsh reality of food security during disasters. It impacts everyone's from families struggling to feed their children to the elderly and those with health conditions. Food insecurity breeds anxiety. It disrupts our local economies and ultimately weakens our national security. It's more than a moral imperative, but also an investment in our shared future by investing in that food security, particularly during disasters. It invests in the well-being of our communities, building a stronger, healthier, and more resistant or resilient society.
Absolutely. So a couple of the facts about food insecurity that we pulled to kind of create a foundation for our proposal is that food insecurity is actually a USDA official term for when someone doesn't have access to food and is unsure of what or when their next meal will be. This affects millions, tens of millions of people and 14 million children across our country. And there's many causes for it. It could be poverty, unemployment, racism and discrimination, of course, people with chronic health conditions, and also affordable housing or lack of affordable housing. Having access to food obviously impacts a person's physical, mental health and well-being. And not having access to food would obviously hinder a person's ability to be well. A helpful tool that we found while we were researching for this project was the Food Environment Atlas, which has a lot of interesting information. You can go in and you can click a selection of dates and then a lot of different variables. This that I wanted to show you guys is just the household food insecurity percentages over a 3-year average. And so you can see that really it's something that, it's happening on the East Coast, it's happening close to the West Coast, and certainly in the South. And so that's something to keep in mind when considering how a policy might impact not just a locality or a state, but also the federal level as well.
And knowing that, you know that as disaster strikes, the climate plays a huge part in it. The climate crisis itself is a direct threat to our food security. Extreme weather events, droughts, floods, wildfires all disrupt food, limit availability, and drive up prices. So when our basic needs, particularly food, inaccessibility creates hunger, our livelihoods are impacted along with the social and economic stability of any of our communities. And so you can see here that the agriculture is a $30 billion industry just in the US, and that we supply a great deal, not just to ourselves, but worldwide. And so what we need to do is act on that excess and build a resilient local food sourcing and storage system that can withstand the effects of these drastic changes in our climate.
So we have a proposed solution that touches on 3 things, and you obviously already noticed it in the name of our act that we're creating. Our proposed solution has 3 parts: sources, storage, and stability. So sources obviously is the answer to the question, where is the food coming from? So it could be a local co-op, it could be a farm, food pantries, of course, or a farmer's market or community garden. Storage is the question of how do we ensure the food is good and will stay good? The answer to this question is food grade warehouses and pantries. And then the question of stability: how do we create a system, a food system, where people are sure of where their next meal will come from? And this is a much harder question to answer, of course, because it requires stable funding, it requires partnerships, community building, incentive programs, perhaps. And then for a lot of these folks, reliable transportation to maybe these sites where there's food sources and storage. So we also did a try. We tried to draft a piece of legislation. I'm only familiar with drafting legislation at the state level, and so I know that it looks different from state to state, and then obviously from local to the federal level. But these are the sorts of things that we would talk about if we were drafting this act. So obviously title, purpose, and definitions. We would want to ensure that there is clear objectives to the program, some of which Mario and I have talked about offline, and they still need to be kind of, I think, discussed in the context of like these communities and what their capacity is. creation of grants that would fund this work, expanding food sources, incentivizing local food production efforts, and then networks themselves. And then obviously any good policy has reporting requirements, and some note about the appropriation there. I'll just keep on going. So there are some programs on the federal level that I'm just checking really quickly on the chat to make sure that you guys can still hear me. Okay. There are some programs that exist already at the federal level that are doing some of this work. So DSNAP is Disaster SNAP. If you haven't heard of it, it's SNAP that gets kind of employed in cases of maybe like a natural emergency or something like that. NIFA is the National Institute of Food, and it says argument, but it should be agriculture. But they do a lot of good research surrounding food security and those sorts of things. And they're also really good about connecting information and data about farming and agriculture to kind of what this means in terms of food and how much food there is available. And then PACE, which talks about a little bit of these incentive programs that we mentioned previously, where are we incentivizing farmers and agricultural land to be used to create a more stable food source and food network.
And so we often talk about that rural and urban divide, but really it's about a rural and urban cohesiveness. Our proposal addresses the diverse issues of sources, storage, and stability by promoting local food systems and ensuring adequate storage and establishing stable distribution networks. Through the power of community collaboration, that means solutions are tailored to the unique challenges faced by each of our different communities. Rural and urban areas experience food insecurity differently. Rural communities often rely on local agriculture and face challenges with transportation and storage. I personally know of this living in rural Northern California, and then urban areas often grapple with limited space for food production and distribution. I know that also being the case, having lived in the larger San Francisco Bay Area. The idea then is that to collaborate regionally and develop multi-agency feeding plans for when disasters create emergent and scarce food conditions, providing emergency food and resources to people who are in shelters or unable to cook or store food at home, and create commercial cold storage options for local meats and produce. By working together and considering the specifics for each of these communities, we can create a more resilient and equitable food system for everyone. And that means collaborating with organizations within our communities. So again, here in Humboldt County, throughout the state of California, in other states, I found particularly what's called COADs or VOADs, community organizations active in disaster, or volunteer organizations active in disaster. And for one in particular, there is World Kitchen, which is an NGO, non-governmental agency, nonprofit, which during the earthquake in 2022 that had occurred up here, our Office of Emergency Services took well over 24 hours to activate and mobilize, whereas our relationships with who we have here in our community and the knowledge that was carried from a couple of individuals in particular with their relationships with World Kitchen, were able to get food trucks into the Rio Del community who had lost about 25 to 30% of their housing stock as a result of that disaster. And so the idea is that COADs bring together community organizations to coordinate disaster relief efforts, ensuring efficient and effective responses. Whether it's through businesses, tribes, other nonprofits, or faith-based organizations, they're prepared through mitigation, protection, and in response and recovery. And then you also have local governments who play a part in their crucial role in implementing long-term solutions, particularly through the federally acquired multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plans. And so it's creating this triad of effectiveness by working together and creating a more comprehensive and sustainable approach to disaster relief. And taking into consideration when we put this together, we thought of at least two questions about this. And so why would we want to create a new program? And it's not really a new program. It's a better coordinated effort among already existing organizations. It's getting them to collaborate and use their logistics. And to parse that, if it works for our US military, then why wouldn't it work for refining our food pathways? And then taking into consideration, what do we do if and when these storages are in excess? Well, before anything were to expire, the best idea that we could come up with is to donate back to the food banks, to donate to the shelters or local orgs that may be in need. And so the idea here is that we need to work together to build a more sustainable and resilient food system that can withstand the challenges of climate crisis. There is the need for a central operator, whether it would be someone like World Kitchen or whether it would be someone more local who understands the streamline and logistics of our community. There needs to be someone to shoulder the responsibilities and concerns. There needs to be a primary point of coordination. Because the mission-based focus of serving community food needs, the operator should be a nonprofit organization that can subsidize operations with grants and donations and enter into legal agreements, memorandums of understanding. And that is our final slide. And so we thank everybody for being here today and
Thank you.
taking the opportunity to hear from us.